There we go.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. And thanks everybody for joining us tonight to talk about coach and referee interactions. Ryan, can you see the PowerPoint?
Yep.
Okay, good. So again, thanks for joining us tonight to talking about coach referee interactions and I guess the importance of positive interactions between coaches and referees, and a little bit about some misunderstood or often incorrectly applied rules maybe. So my name is Kyle Woodworth. I'm the men's performance lead with Basketball New Brunswick. And I guess I have experience on both sides of these interactions. So I've coached everything from U9 right up through university men and provincial teams. And I've also refereed everything from, I guess, U11 up to university and professional games when we had them here. So lots of experience, again, on both sides of this at all kinds of different levels. So just where we're going with this tonight, first we'll talk about just why this subject is important at all and why we need to make sure that I think we have mostly coaches on here tonight. So why as coaches, it is important for us to not only understand the rules, but to treat referees with respect and to have positive interaction and positive communication with them during games. We'll talk a little bit about rules, some commonly misunderstood rules, and also the points of emphasis for this season, which have come out from Canada Basketball. And then we'll get into not only how, but also when we should be and shouldn't be communicating with referees. At any point as we're going through this, I should have said if you have questions, Ryan will monitor the chat, so feel free to put that in there. And also feel free, I can't see the chat, but feel free to also just unmute yourself if I pause and jump in with any questions that you may have. And we'll also have time, anything that I might not cover that you have questions about, we will have time at the end of the presentation to answer any questions that you might have. In terms of why these interactions are important, we are a pretty small basketball community, I would say, in New Brunswick overall when you compare to other places in the province. But I think the game is growing, and certainly the number of games happening around the province is growing. And I would say the length of the season is growing as well. And I'm not sure right now if the number of referees that we have is growing at the same rate that we need it to in order to fulfill the demand that we have for games. Without question, the number one reason that we either lose referees or just don't get referees in the first place is negative interactions with coaches, with players, with fans or parents in the stands. So most referees that start refereeing at a young age quit for some reason within 2 or 3 years of refereeing of getting started. So we as coaches have a responsibility to make sure that referees are having a positive experience so that we can keep them in the game and that we can continue to grow the game. Like I said, we are a small enough province that there's a lot of crossover between our coaching community, our players, our referees. There's a lot of people that are in more than one role. So we should be able to, that gives us an advantage in terms of working together to grow the game as a whole. The reason that falls so much on coaches, I would say, to make sure that we have positive interactions with referees is because as coaches, we are going to set the tone for the way that players, parents, and other fans there watching treat the referees. If you look at players that are hard to deal with, or if you look at games where parents are hard to deal with in the stands, it almost always starts with a coach that is being difficult with a referee on the floor as well. And I understand that there are times, and we've all been there. I've been there as a coach as well. There are times that we are going to be frustrated with referees. But there are ways that we can approach those situations and ways that we can approach those conversations in a respectful manner that's going to set a good example for our players and our parents and make it a positive experience for the referees as well. I would say one of the biggest areas of growth that we could have as coaches is to make sure that we understand the rules better. And there's a few reasons I think for why we may not always understand the rules as well as we could. One is that the games that we would typically watch on TV, so NCAA or NBA games, depending what your preference would be, don't have the same rule set that we do here. There's not a lot of FIBA basketball on TV. There's not a lot of Canadian university basketball on TV. If you don't live in Fredericton, you probably don't watch a lot of U Sport basketball. If you don't live in one of our major centers, you probably don't watch a lot of small college basketball within our province either. So we don't always see that FIBA rule set applied. And so there's things we might see on TV. There's things we might see online if we're watching highlights, whether it's certain calls that happen or terminology that they use that isn't what we use here in Canada, where we play with that FIBA or the international rule set. And as referees, I think most referees that have been around a while are pretty understanding if a coach questions what we see, or maybe like a foul call that was close, and recognizing that the angle that a coach has from the bench is different than the angle that I might have from the floor on the floor as a referee. And we understand if people question that a little bit. As a referee, it's really hard to be patient when coaches are arguing with you when they saw the same thing that you saw and they just don't know what the rule is. And then it's hard to have positive interactions with that coach the rest of the game, because you do lose a little bit of credibility with referees if you are arguing and you just have the rule completely wrong. In most cases, the referee on the floor is going to have a better understanding of the rules than you do as a coach. And having said that, at the level, if we're coaching youth basketball, we probably also have new referees at that level. Maybe they don't have the same understanding of the rules that somebody would if they were refereeing a higher level high school game or a college game or a university game, but they probably have a better understanding of the rules because they've been through clinics, they've written a test, they've passed a test in order to referee those games that you are coaching. So they've been through that process, and most coaches haven't. So they probably do have a better understanding of the rules, even if under pressure they misapply them sometimes. I would say the best way that we could get coaches to understand the rules better is to actually attend referee clinics. That doesn't commit you to having to referee games at all. Pretty much every area around the province is starting referee clinics this month, or some, I believe, started them within the last couple of weeks. You can attend those clinics as coaches. You can have your players attend those clinics. There's no cost to attend them in most of the centers around the province. And so just sitting in on those clinics, you're going to learn the rules better. You're going to learn what referees are looking for. You're going to start to see things from a referee's perspective. And I think that will give you, it will certainly give you a better understanding as a coach of what referees are looking for. And it's going to help you during the game to maybe understand where referees are coming from in conversations that you have with them, or in the calls that they are making on the floor. There's a few, we'll just talk about a few here that are common things that I would say that are either different here than what you would see if you were watching games on TV, or where we use different language here than you would hear in the media or on TV. And it is important when you're having conversations with referees, if we can use the correct FIBA vocabulary. I think that's important in that respectful communication. So the first thing I would say and these are just things that as a referee, I would say refereeing games, these are some areas where coaches either misinterpret rules or use language that isn't necessarily correct, or argue for things that maybe don't actually apply. So the first one would be that what we have as technical and unsportsmanlike fouls. You hear a lot of coaches use the term intentional foul or flagrant foul because that's what they hear on TV. So neither one of those terms is actually in the FIBA rulebook. So what you might think of as a flagrant foul or an intentional foul is actually an unsportsmanlike foul here. A lot of people also think technical and unsportsmanlike fouls are essentially the same thing, and they are not. And even within the last few years, the penalties for those two types of fouls have changed. So it is important that we know the difference. So a technical foul is any form of disrespect. So if it's something verbal or taunting or like hand signals that a player is making at another player or clapping in the face of another player. But the key with a technical foul is that there is no body contact. There's no physical contact. An unsportsmanlike foul would be, there's different categories, but if there is contact, so if somebody pushes somebody else, for example, that would fall under an unsportsmanlike foul instead of a technical foul. The key in understanding that, or the reason that it's important to understand those, is because the penalties are different. So a technical foul is just going to be one shot for the other team, and then wherever we were in the game, we're going to pick it up at that same point. So let's say we had a white team with the basketball, and let's say the point guard for the white team got called for a technical foul. The other team would shoot one free throw, but then the white team is going to get the basketball back. That's different with an unsportsmanlike foul. The penalty for an unsportsmanlike foul is going to be 2 shots, and that team, the team that didn't get called for the unsportsmanlike, is going to get the ball in the front court. So sometimes, it's important to know the difference for your own benefit as well. There could be times where that happens in a game, and if you can use the correct language, like maybe a referee is about to misapply that rule and you got called for a technical and they're going to award 2 shots, or the other team got called for an unsportsmanlike foul and they're only going to award 1 shot or not give you the basketball. So there are times, especially if you can use the correct language and terminology, where understanding the rules can help you to making sure they're applied correctly as well. You also hear in kind of that unsportsmanlike category, you might see in the NBA, they have what they would call take fouls in transition. That would also fall under an unsportsmanlike foul here, or clear path fouls. You hear that on TV as well. That's a type of unsportsmanlike foul here. We have different categories of unsportsmanlike fouls. So those transition fouls would fall within our unsportsmanlikes and would have the same penalty. So 2 shots and the basketball. Also important to recognize with technical fouls, who the foul is actually charged on. So if it's a player on the floor, a technical foul is going to count against that player and is also going to be one of your team fouls and one of their personal fouls. If it's a player on the bench or it's an assistant coach, that foul is actually going to be charged to the head coach as an indirect technical. If it's the head coach that takes the foul, it's charged to the head coach as a direct technical. So if a head coach gets 2 direct technicals, they are removed from the game or disqualified from the game. If they get any combination of 3 direct or indirect technicals, so 3 directed towards their bench, then they're removed from the game at that point as well. So it is important to recognize those situations. The active shooting, again, one that sometimes gets confused if you watch a lot of NBA basketball, although our rule is pretty similar now. You hear the term continuation a lot. That is not a FIBA term. So we would use active shooting with a player. So if we are trying to determine whether or not we are giving free throws, continuation is not a word that is recognized in the FIBA rulebook. The active shooting starts as soon as that player begins to lift the basketball into their shooting motion. So essentially, it's pretty similar now to what the NBA continuation would be. But if you have stopped your dribble and you're in that kind of 2-step process, let's say, of getting to the rim, and you've gathered the basketball and begun to lift into your shooting motion, you're probably going to be awarded shots in that situation. Travels have changed a little bit in the last few years, although I guess it's been quite a few years now, where we recognize the 0 step. So a lot of coaches will still yell for travel travels in situations where they say he or she has taken more than 2 steps. Well, if a player is moving and they gather the basketball with a foot on the floor, that is now called a 0 step, whereas before that would have counted as their first step. So they can still go 0, 1, 2. And without it being a travel. That is although it's not the same terminology necessarily that's used in the NBA rulebook, FIBA and NBA rules regarding travels after picking up your dribble on the move are now essentially the same. Okay, so people have yelled for years about how they don't call travels in the NBA. That's because of the 0 step, and now it's the same rules with FIBA. If you were on the move, that does not apply to somebody who is standing still. So if I'm catching the basketball and somebody's guarding me and I'm going to start a dribble, I don't get a 0 step in that case. I still need the basketball out of my hands before my pivot foot has left the floor if I'm starting a dribble. The other one that coaches will yell about quite a bit is let's say a player starts to lose their balance and their foot comes off the floor. That's not actually a travel if it's their pivot foot. If you're not dribbling, it's not a travel for lifting your pivot foot off the floor. It's a travel for letting it come back to the floor again. So if I'm off balance and my pivot foot comes up and I can maintain that balance without that foot coming back down, I haven't actually traveled yet. And that's one that a lot of coaches will argue. Block charge is another one that it's one of the harder calls in basketball, and there's a lot of them that are 50-50 calls, and you could watch them on video and still not be 100% sure. The one area where coaches often misinterpret or misunderstand is we will hear it can't be a charge, that player was moving. A defensive player is allowed to move to maintain their legal guarding position. So if you can remember that term, the legal guarding position, that is what referees are looking for. So basically, once you are on the floor facing the ball handler and between the ball handler and the rim, you can move to maintain that position if you are moving laterally or sideways or backwards. If you are doing that and maintaining your legal guarding position and there's contact through the middle of your body, that's a charge even if you are moving. If you're moving forward, then that would be a block. So you can't move forward. A defensive player cannot move forward into an offensive player. The block charge semicircle, if you have that on your floor, is also another one that causes some arguments. Our rule is slightly different, again, than what you would see in the States on TV. So on TV, if a defender is inside that circle, it's an automatic block if there is contact. That's not necessarily the case here. Here, it's just that if there's an airborne shooter and that defender is in the circle, it just cannot be called a charge. It doesn't necessarily have to be an automatic block, although a lot of referees do apply it that way. It also only applies to people that are airborne. So if you have, especially at the younger ages, if you were making that argument and a player has just never left the floor and dribbled through somebody, then it would be as if that circle wasn't even there, even if it's at a gym that has it. If they're not in the air, the block charge circle is irrelevant. Backcourt violations. Just a lot of times we get arguments as referees that the ball was tipped maybe, and then it goes into the backcourt. The rule isn't necessarily whether or not the ball is tipped. The whole key to a backcourt violation is who was the last person to touch the basketball. So if, again, let's say we have a white team and a dark team. If the white team has the ball in their front court, so they've already crossed half, they have control of the basketball, and they go to throw a pass, and that pass gets deflected. But then before it goes in the backcourt, it hits one of the offensive players' feet and goes into the backcourt, and then that offensive team goes and picks it up again, even though it was deflected, because it touched the offense. They were the last people to touch it in the front court and the first people to touch it in the backcourt. That's going to be a backcourt violation. That's another one that causes a lot of arguments with coaches. And timeouts is the last one. The biggest thing here, compared to what you see on TV, you cannot call timeouts during live play, either from the floor or from the bench. I had a coach last year, I don't know if it was U13 game maybe, kept trying to call timeout. His player was laying on the floor, kept trying to call timeout. I wouldn't give him a timeout. And he accused me many times of not knowing the rules because I wouldn't give him a timeout while his player was laying on the floor. So we cannot call timeouts during live play. You can call timeouts after you get scored on. You can call timeouts on dead balls, or you can call timeouts after a second foul shot if it goes in, whether you were the team that made the foul shot or not. Those are all timeout situations, but not during live play. This year, this is what CBOC, which is our National Officials Association, has identified as our points of emphasis. So dead ball efficiency and keeping the game moving. This really, as coaches, this applies in two spots. So it would really be coming out of quarter breaks and coming out of timeouts. So and whether or not this happens at all youth levels, it may not. It depends on where you are and how good the minor officials are, I would say, at the table. But in a timeout, as an example, timeout should last 1 minute. There will be a horn at the 50-second mark. So when there's 10 seconds left, there is a second horn at the 1 minute mark. By rule, you're really supposed to be ready to play at that second horn. It's not like the first horn is a warning and then you're going to keep talking and keep drawing on your board, and the second horn is your second warning and the referee is going to come get you. By rule, you are supposed to be ready to play at that second horn. Most of the time that obviously doesn't happen, but having said that, when that second horn goes, your players should be at least ready to come on the floor. So you shouldn't be still in the middle of drawing up a play and taking an extra 20 or 30 seconds after that second horn has gone. Referees can, if you have timeouts left, they can charge you with another timeout if you take too long to come out of a timeout. If you don't have any timeouts, it can be a technical foul for delay of game. And the other one you see a lot, especially it's starting to trickle down to other levels, is if you are going to have your players huddle, like if somebody's shooting 2 foul shots and you have your players huddle before the first foul shot, they need to get in quickly before that second foul shot and not delay the game there. Protecting the shooter is just making sure that as referees, we see that shooter actually hit the floor and we are not having people slide under shooters into their landing space, because that's where we can get injured ankles or knees or that sort of thing if they're landing on defensive players' feet. So it's not just protecting them as they release the shot. As referees, we would be taught to watch until they release the basketball. We are watching up top at that release point. And then as they release the basketball and the ball's out of their hands, then we start to pick up their feet and make sure that they have clear space to land. Screening and contact on cutters. This is mostly off-ball stuff, so making sure that we are setting legal screens. The cylinder is a big part of this. So your cylinder is basically, if you were to draw a line down through your shoulders and up through your shoulders, it extends all the way to the ceiling. When you're setting a screen, you need to be inside of that cylinder. So we can't have our elbows or our feet out wider, essentially, than our shoulders. If we do, and it causes an advantage and a defender is knocked off balance, then that would be an illegal screen. And cutters, really we're trying to avoid clutching and holding on cutters. So if you want to be physical with a cutter, you need to move your feet and get in front of their path, as opposed to reaching out maybe with a forearm as they run in front of you or behind you. Bench decorum and communication is a big one. We will talk more about the communication part here in a few minutes. Bench decorum is really just making sure you understand that if you are a head coach, you are responsible for everything that happens on your bench. The general message this year is that if players, like if somebody hits a 3 or somebody makes a big play and your bench wants to jump up and celebrate, that's fine. We'll give them that one reaction, but they need to get back down, sitting down pretty quickly. They can't stay standing during play. And the other big one is, especially in second halves, now that we shoot in front of our bench in the first half, during the second half, if there is a play happening in front of your bench you can't have your whole bench up screaming at that offensive player. Or if somebody from the other team is shooting a three from right in front of your bench can't be yelling at them or jumping up with their hands up in the air. That's going to be an automatic technical foul. And then rebounding fouls, the big part of rebounding fouls is that we want to make sure we get the ones that actually cause a consequence. So there's going to be lots of contact. We'll talk about contact also in a few minutes and how we view that as referees. There's going to be lots of contact rebounding. We want to make sure we're calling, as referees, we want to make sure we are calling rebounding fouls that actually change who gets possession, or change, like if a player is taken out of the play and now it's a 5-on-4 going the other way, we want to call those fouls. We don't want to call marginal contact where maybe there's contact on one side of the key and the ball ends up on the other side of the key and it didn't affect who would get the rebound. We're not looking to have whistles in those situations. Speaking of rebounding, that's another one we often hear coaches yell about, over the back. Over the back is not actually a term in the rule book. It would just be called a pushing foul. And we also recognize, like, there's times where players might reach over somebody's back to get a rebound. Just because you are behind somebody, rebounding does not automatically make it an over the back foul. If you don't go through their body to get to that ball, if you just jump over top of somebody, or like at U11, U12, you just have a really tall kid who keeps reaching over top of people, those are not over the back fouls. Okay, so just a couple quick points about the way that we would view the game as referees. Or I would say, if you're a youth coach, the way that we are trying to teach young referees to the game. So as I said, if you're coaching U11, U12, U13, U14, you probably have some fairly new referees who don't view the game the same way that a more experienced referee would, or they haven't seen as many situations as a more experienced referee would. So there's a couple areas where we are trying to educate referees, or we're trying to teach referees kind of to view the game through a different lens. One is in regards to contact. Basketball is a contact sport. Not all contact is illegal contact. So we hear from coaches all the time, there was a lot of contact on that play, or did you not have any contact on that play? And a lot of times they're asking that obviously because we didn't have a whistle. And a lot of times the answer is yes, there was all kinds of contact on that play, but there was nothing illegal about it. Or yes, there was contact, but it was marginal contact. So the contact we are looking for is contact that actually causes an advantage for one team or the other. If there's marginal contact, and let's say we bump a ball handler, but we use the term RSBQ, which would be like their rhythm, their speed, their balance, and their quickness. If the contact isn't affecting at least one of those four things, then we should not have a whistle on it. We also need to look at who is actually initiating contact. There's a lot of times that a defender has done nothing wrong, or where a defender goes vertical in their cylinder, as you see in the picture there. I guess it's hard to say whether it went vertical or not there. We just see the freeze frame of it. But if a defender is in legal guarding position and has done nothing wrong, there can be a pretty significant amount of contact without actually having a whistle. Where we would want whistles is, especially at the younger ages, if there's a big crash and we have a bunch of bodies on the floor, then obviously we need to have whistles in those situations. Or if it's having a significant effect on a player finishing at the rim or getting knocked off balance as a ball handler, then we would want whistles. So asking a referee or saying to a referee there's a lot of contact there, you could be right, but that doesn't mean that the referee was wrong in not blowing their whistle. The other thing we're trying to teach, and it's really being pushed nationally now the last few years, is to have patient whistles. So we teach referees that they want to see the start, the middle, and the finish of a play, meaning that we could have a foul on a drive to the rim that's a shooting foul, and the referee doesn't actually blow their whistle as soon as that contact occurs. They have what you as a coach might view as a late whistle. That's actually what we would view as a patient whistle and good timing as a referee. And you'll hear coaches a lot of times say, well, you wouldn't have called that if the ball had gone in. And that might be true. Sometimes as referees, we do wait to see if the basketball goes in or not. And if it does, then there might not have been an advantage, and we don't need to have a whistle. We would rather have late whistles that are correct than have referees constantly blowing their whistle every time contact happens and having it be marginal contact that did not need a whistle. So arguing that a call was late when it was the correct call, referees probably just have good timing in that situation. And the last one is just areas of responsibility and who actually has the best look at a play. And that just recognizing that that's not always the referee that is closest to the play. As referees, we are looking for what we would call an open look at the play, meaning we can see that space between the offensive player and the defensive player. There are times where, especially in the key, where plays close off to you for no fault or through no fault of your own, where an offensive player turns away and all of a sudden you're looking through that offensive player's back, or you're looking through a defender's back, and there might be a referee on the other side of the floor, especially when we only have 2 referees in these games. There might be a referee on the complete other side of the floor who has a great look at that play and will have a whistle. And again, we hear as referees, well, why did he or she not call it when it was right in front of them? And it might just be, in fact, that play closed off to that referee. So it's not always the nearest referee that is going to have a foul call. So last thing here is we'll talk about when and how we should communicate with referees, and maybe more importantly, why we should communicate with referees. And really, there's only one consistent reason I would say that we should communicate with a referee, and that is asking them to clarify or explain either a rule or what they saw. Okay, so if you were just looking for an explanation, it's fine to communicate with a referee for that. Recognizing that's different than I'm just constantly going to ask for explanations to make it look like you're wrong as a referee. But if there is something you genuinely need clarification on, like a rule interpretation, or you want an explanation as to what a referee actually saw, those are things we can communicate with referees about, as long as it's not constant throughout a game. The when of it is really important. So we do not want, like, especially at the younger ages, we should never be communicating with referees during live play, meaning the ball is actually in play, we're going up and down the floor. There might be a referee in front of you, but the more time you spend arguing or communicating with a referee at that time, the less likely that referee is to be able to actually focus on the play. And if they have a coach constantly in their ear while the play is going on, they're not going to call the game as well as they would otherwise. We should not be communicating from a distance. So unfortunately, the way that it works with 2-person refereeing is if I call let's say we're shooting free throws, if I call a foul, I'm going to go report that foul, and then I'm going to the other side of the floor away from the table and the benches, meaning that the referee that you're actually closest to at that time isn't the referee that called a foul against your team, let's say. Recognizing that, we cannot be, as coaches, we cannot be yelling across the floor at referees. We can talk to the referee in front of us. They might not have an explanation for you, but they might say something like, I'll talk to my partner at the next timeout. They'll probably give you a little bit of an ear if it's on a dead ball, but again, like, don't yell across the floor at referees. And this, I think, especially if you are dealing with young referees that are new to the game, you yelling at them from across the floor, or you even trying to ask them a question from off the floor and have them trying to communicate while somebody is shooting free throws from across the floor, is not going to help their play calling the rest of the game. They either haven't dealt with that situation enough, or they don't have the communication skills to actually deal with that. If it's a more experienced referee, if you yell at me from across the floor, it's probably not going to affect me for the next 5 plays, but with a young referee, it probably will. The other time we're not going to talk to referees is the time we should talk to referees is at the end of a timeout, or the end of a quarter break. we will not, or as referees, we should not come talk to you to start a timeout or to start a quarter break. And that's the time a lot of coaches want to talk. So if there's just been a call that you didn't like and then somebody calls a timeout, a referee is probably or should not come over to talk to you at the start of that timeout. You as a coach have 1 minute to talk to your team. You talking to your team is more important than you talking to a referee at that point. And referees actually use timeouts the same way that you would as a coach. They will talk to their partner, talk about what they are seeing, anything they need to watch, or anything they need to make sure they're paying attention to. So those timeouts are valuable for referees as well. And those timeouts are times when if you do question a call, then maybe the two referees can get together. They'll talk about what they saw, or the person that called it will talk about what they saw. And then you might actually get an explanation when the timeout is over. At the end of a timeout, when a referee comes over to get you out of your huddle, that's the time that you can have a conversation with the referee. Or at the end of a quarter break, when a referee comes over to get you out of your huddle, that's the time to have a conversation with a referee. And in terms of what those conversations should look like, it should be you asking specific questions, looking to clarify or get an explanation. It is not you telling the referee what they missed or telling the referee what they are doing wrong. It is questions about specific plays. So we also don't want general questions. Why do you keep calling this? Or why do you keep calling this at one end of the floor and not the other end of the floor? Or how come that was a foul down there and it wasn't a foul down here? If you ask specific questions, what did you see on that last drive to the basket? Okay. Or why did we only shoot one free throw on that technical foul? Something like that. If you want clarifications, then you can ask. Your tone and your body language are going to be a big part of whether you actually get a response or whether you get a response that you like from that official. You can ask pretty much anything if you do it in the right tone or with the right body language, and an official is going to answer your question. If you come at an official aggressively, it doesn't really matter what you ask. You're probably not going to get an answer that you are happy with. And the other thing is, yes, you can ask questions during these times. We can't be asking questions every trip up and down the floor, every dead ball. You need to pick your spots, and it needs to be plays that actually matter. There's nothing worse as a referee than somebody calls a travel like 30 seconds into the game that may or may not have been right, but it was close. It might be a marginal call, and all of a sudden the coach blows up over a travel over the first whistle of the game 30 seconds into the game. So we need to pick our spots as coaches and only ask questions or ask for explanations on significant plays that actually matter. And last thing here, I guess, with communicating with referees, it should only be the head coach that is communicating with referees. As officials, we should not be dealing with or talking to assistant coaches at all. Assistant coaches can stand up to talk to players. Players can stand up on the bench to talk to other players. As soon as an assistant coach is standing up to talk to a referee, or a player from the bench is standing up to talk to a referee, that should be, at minimum, it should be a warning for the bench and probably should be a technical foul at that point. Again, recognizing that young officials, just because they're not giving technical foul doesn't mean that you haven't crossed the line somewhere. It could just mean that they don't know how to handle that situation. So you, as the adult in those situations, it's important that you keep those conversations respectful. So with that, that's really what I had to present, or what I had to talk about. If you have questions about anything officiating related, or any rules that you're not sure of, or anything you've wanted to ask a referee, I guess now is your chance. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so I can see the chat as well. So if you do have questions, feel free again to put it in the chat, or you can unmute and ask your question. nobody has anything, that is the presentation. You are free to go. I will stick around if anybody has any questions.